My daughter-in-law looked straight at me during dinner and said, "You'll never sit at our table as an equal." I stayed quiet and smiled, but the very next day, when the bank released the name of the new major stakeholder in her family's company, she almost fainted when she read it. The name was mine. Before I tell you how it happened, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Dawson. I am 68 years old, a widow, and a mother to one son, Daniel. After my husband passed away, I built a quiet life for myself. I live in a modest home, I take care of my garden, and I spend time volunteering at the local library. I never needed luxury to feel fulfilled. Daniel, my son, has always been my pride. He worked hard to build a career and a family of his own. I wanted nothing more than to see him happy. But the truth is, his marriage came with challenges I never expected. His wife, Vanessa, came from a wealthy family and never missed a chance to remind me of it. She dressed in designer clothes, carried herself like royalty, and often spoke down to me as though I were beneath her. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was young and proud, that maybe over time she would grow kinder. But every family dinner was the same. She would talk about expensive vacations, her family's company, and her rich lifestyle, then look at me with a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. My son noticed the tension, but he hated conflict, so he kept silent. I chose silence too, thinking dignity was the better answer. Still, inside, her words stung. I never showed it, but I often went home after those gatherings with a heavy heart. I didn't want wealth, but I did want respect, and Vanessa had made it clear she didn't think I deserved any. What happened at one particular dinner would change everything, not just for me, but for her as well. The evening of the dinner was one I will never forget. Daniel had insisted that we attend a formal gathering at Vanessa's parents' estate. It was supposed to be a simple family dinner, but with the Whitmores, nothing was ever simple. Their home was a sprawling mansion with marble floors that gleamed under chandeliers, long dining tables dressed in crystal glasses, and servants moving quietly in the background. It was the kind of place where you could feel out of place just by breathing too loudly. I arrived in a modest dress I had worn for years, paired with simple pearl earrings Henry had once given me. They weren't expensive, but they carried love in every shine. To me, they meant more than any diamond. Vanessa, however, saw them differently. She swept into the room in a gown that shimmered like gold, her hair styled perfectly, dripping with jewelry. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when she glanced at me. The meal began pleasantly enough. Conversations circled around business deals, investment strategies, and upcoming vacations in Europe. I sat quietly, listening more than I spoke, as was often my habit. I wasn't from their world of wealth and show. My world had been raising a family, saving every penny, and finding joy in the small things. Homemade pies, birthdays celebrated with balloons from the dollar store, and evenings reading books with Daniel when he was little. Halfway through dinner, the conversation turned to family value. Richard Whitmore, Vanessa's father, was discussing the importance of legacy and how the Whitmore family name was recognized in business circles. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her glass of wine held delicately between two fingers, and smirked. Her eyes flicked toward me, and I knew something sharp was coming. She laughed lightly, then said, "Of course, not everyone can be part of a family like ours. Some people will never sit at our table as equals." Her words were directed at me, clear as day, though she pretended otherwise. The table went silent. Even the clinking of silverware seemed to pause. My son Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing at me with helpless eyes. He wanted to defend me, I could tell, but his fear of confrontation kept him frozen. Richard cleared his throat, trying to smooth over the tension, but Vanessa wasn't done. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly, as she added, "Some people are just ordinary, and there's nothing wrong with that. But let's be honest, it's not the same as being extraordinary." A soft laugh rippled from one or two guests who didn't realize the cruelty, but most people avoided my eyes. My cheeks burned, not from shame, but from the sting of being so openly humiliated in a room full of strangers. I wanted to stand up, to say something, to remind her that respect isn't bought with money. But instead, I forced a polite smile and lifted my glass of water calmly, as though her words hadn't touched me. Inside, though, it hurt. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. My mind flashed back to all the years I had given to raising Daniel, all the nights Henry and I had stayed awake worrying about bills, and all the sacrifices we made so our son could have a better life. To Vanessa, none of that mattered. To her, worth was measured in dollars and titles, not love or sacrifice. The dinner moved on, but the mood was strained. People spoke, but their words felt hollow. I stayed quiet, choosing not to fight back, because I knew nothing I said in that moment would change her. Her pride was too big, her arrogance too loud. I excused myself early that evening, telling Daniel I was tired. He kissed my cheek and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I just smiled and told him not to worry. But as I walked out of that mansion, my heart was heavy. Vanessa had drawn a line in the sand, making it clear she saw me as beneath her. It wasn't the first time she had tried to belittle me, but it was the cruelest, the most public. I went home, changed into my night clothes, and sat alone in my quiet kitchen. I replayed her words again and again in my mind. "You'll never sit at our table as an equal." They echoed like thunder, but instead of breaking me, something shifted inside me. I realized that staying silent didn't mean I was weak. Sometimes silence is power. I didn't need to prove myself to her in that moment, but I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. Life has a way of humbling the arrogant, and soon Vanessa would learn that lesson in a way she never expected. I poured myself a cup of tea, staring out the window at the night sky. Somewhere deep inside, past the sting of humiliation, I felt a quiet strength rising. I had lived my life with dignity and wisdom, and I held a truth Vanessa knew nothing about. She thought I was ordinary. She thought I was powerless. She was wrong. That night after the dinner, I couldn't sleep. Vanessa's words replayed in my head like a cruel song I couldn't turn off. "You'll never sit at our table as an equal." They weren't just meant to wound me. They were meant to erase me, to make me small in the eyes of everyone who heard them. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, staring at the darkness outside my window, and asked myself if silence was still the right answer. But as the minutes turned into hours, something else stirred inside me. Not anger, not revenge, but resolve. I remembered Henry, my late husband, who had always told me, "Margaret, dignity is powerful, but never confuse dignity with passivity. When the time is right, stand." That night, I knew it was time to stand. For years, I had lived simply, but that didn't mean I lived without foresight. Henry had left me with some savings, and together we had invested wisely over the decades. Stocks, properties, and a few shares in companies that were growing steadily. I had never spoken much about it, not even to Daniel. To the world, I was just an ordinary widow living on a pension. But the truth was, I had been careful, patient, and disciplined. While Vanessa was parading around with luxury handbags, I was quietly building security. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Mr. Harris, a kind man who had worked with Henry and me for years. "I need you to look into something," I told him. "The Whitmore family company. I heard whispers last night that they've been under strain. Is it true?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before he answered. "Yes, Margaret. They've been selling off significant shares to cover debts. The market has been shaky for them." "Why do you ask?" I took a slow breath. "Because I want to buy." Mr. Harris hesitated, clearly surprised. "That's a very bold move. Are you sure?" I straightened my back, even though he couldn't see me. "I'm sure. I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I won't be treated like I don't matter. I want enough shares to have a voice. Not for vanity, but for respect." Over the next week, I reviewed my finances carefully. It meant parting with some of the savings I had guarded for years, but I knew Henry would have approved. He had always believed that true wealth wasn't about flaunting money. It was about using it wisely. With Mr. Harris guiding me, I quietly bought a large block of shares in the Whitmore Company. Each transaction felt like a small stone placed in a foundation, one that would soon be unshakable. By the end of the process, I wasn't just an investor. I was one of the major stakeholders. The irony of it made me almost laugh. The very company Vanessa had used to prop up her arrogance now carried my name in its books. But what surprised me most was how calm I felt. There was no rush of triumph, no burning desire to humiliate her back. Instead, I felt steady. This wasn't about revenge. This was about balance. It was about showing Vanessa, and maybe even Daniel, that worth isn't measured by loud words or glittering wealth. True worth is revealed in patience, wisdom, and the choices you make when no one is watching. I didn't tell Daniel what I had done. I wanted him to see it the same way Vanessa would when the news broke publicly. For once, I didn't want to explain myself, defend myself, or justify anything. I wanted the truth to speak louder than anything I could ever say. A few days later, Mr. Harris called again. The bank will be releasing the list of new stakeholders tomorrow. Your name will be there. I thanked him, then hung up the phone. That evening, I cooked myself a simple dinner, roasted chicken and vegetables, and ate alone in my quiet dining room. Yet, unlike the night after that cruel dinner, I didn't feel small. I felt tall, even in my little chair. I imagined Vanessa's face when she saw the announcement. I imagined the silence at the table when she realized the woman she mocked now held power in her own family's empire. Still, I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't meet cruelty with cruelty. When the moment came, I would remain calm, dignified, and gracious. Because the real victory was not in her humiliation, but in my refusal to sink to her level. That night, as I placed Henry's photo on the nightstand beside me, I whispered, "I did it, love. You'd be proud." Then, for the first time in days, I slept peacefully. The morning the announcement went public began like any other day. I brewed myself a pot of tea, opened the newspaper, and there it was. An official statement from the bank naming the new major stakeholders in the Whitmore family company. And just as Mr. Harris had promised, my name appeared clearly. Margaret Dawson. I traced the letters with my finger, not out of disbelief, but out of quiet satisfaction. It didn't take long for the news to spread. The Whitmore name carried weight in the city, and when financial news broke about them, it moved quickly through whispers, headlines, and social circles. That same afternoon, Daniel called, his voice a mixture of confusion and shock. "Mom, your name, it's everywhere. Did you really?" "Yes, Daniel," I answered calmly. "I invested. I'm now a major stakeholder." He was silent for a long moment before letting out a soft laugh. "You never stop surprising me, do you?" His tone carried pride, though he tried to hide it. Later that evening, Vanessa arranged another family dinner, this time at a high-end restaurant in the city. The timing was no coincidence. I knew she had seen the announcement, and this dinner was her attempt to control the narrative. I arrived in the same simple floral dress I had worn to the Whitmore's mansion before. I didn't need to wear anything new or flashy. My presence alone carried more weight now than the glittering jewels on her wrist. The restaurant was grand, with velvet chairs and golden chandeliers. Guests murmured politely, waiters moved swiftly, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air. Vanessa sat at the head of the long table, her posture perfect, her smile forced. Daniel sat beside her, visibly uneasy, while Richard Whitmore was unusually quiet. As I walked in, all eyes turned to me, some with curiosity, others with cautious respect. Vanessa raised her glass, her voice pitched higher than usual. "Ah, Margaret, you made it. We were just talking about family and business." I smiled politely and took my seat. I wouldn't miss it. Dinner began, and the conversations around the table tiptoed awkwardly around the news. Vanessa laughed a little too loudly, trying to keep control of the evening. But then, midway through the main course, her phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen and I watched as the color drained from her face. She had opened a financial news update, and there it was again, Margaret Dawson, major stakeholder. Her hand trembled so badly she nearly spilled her wine. Daniel leaned over, whispering, "What is it?" But everyone could already see. Guests began murmuring. One leaned toward another, whispering, "Is that her? The Margaret Dawson?" Another looked at me with wide eyes, then back at Vanessa, their expressions shifting from confusion to realization. Vanessa slammed her phone down on the table and stared at me. This has to be a mistake. You? How could you possibly? Her words faltered, caught between disbelief and humiliation. I folded my hands neatly on the table and met her gaze with calm eyes. It's no mistake. I've managed my life carefully. While you were busy looking down on me, I was building something that mattered. Respect doesn't come from the family you're born into, Vanessa. It comes from the choices you make. Silence blanketed the table. Even Richard Whitmore, a man known for his authority, looked at me with something resembling admiration. Daniel's eyes glistened with pride, though he said nothing, letting the moment unfold. Vanessa's face flushed red, her arrogance crumbling in front of everyone she had once sought to impress. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she sat back in her chair, her shoulders slumping ever so slightly, the weight of her humiliation pressing down on her. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice or mock her as she had mocked me. Instead, I said gently, "Vanessa, I don't want to take anything from you. I don't want to embarrass you. All I've ever wanted was respect. I may live simply, but never mistake simplicity for weakness. From now on, we are equal, not because of money, but because we are family." The guests at the table nodded quietly, some even smiling. The power in the room had shifted, not because I shouted, but because I didn't have to. My presence, my patience, and my quiet strength had spoken louder than any insult Vanessa could ever throw. For the rest of the dinner, Vanessa stayed quiet, barely lifting her head. Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. His small gesture said more than words ever could. Pride, gratitude, and love. As dessert was served, I looked around the table and realized the lesson had been delivered. Vanessa's arrogance had been stripped away not by confrontation, but by truth. And in that moment, I understood something Henry had always told me. Sometimes, the most powerful voice in the room is the one that doesn't have to shout. That night, as I left the restaurant, I felt lighter. Not because I had won, but because I had proven, once and for all, that worth is never measured in wealth or vanity. It is measured in character, and no one, not even Vanessa, could take that from me. The dinner ended, but the silence that followed spoke louder than any words could. Vanessa didn't say much as the plates were cleared away, her eyes lowered to the table, her pride visibly shaken. She wasn't the glamorous, arrogant woman who had once sneered at me. She looked smaller now, quieter, caught between disbelief and the uncomfortable realization that her world was no longer as secure as she believed. When I left the restaurant that night, Daniel walked me out to my car. For a moment, we stood together under the glow of the streetlight. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom. You didn't just surprise her. You reminded everyone who you are." His voice cracked slightly, and I could see tears welling in his eyes. It had been hard for him, watching his wife mistreat me and feeling powerless to stop it. But now, he no longer had to. In the days that followed, the news of my stake in the Whitmore Company spread like wildfire. The whispers that once dismissed me as ordinary now carried a different tone, respectful, even admiring. Neighbors stopped me on my morning walks, congratulating me with warm smiles. "We always knew you had strength, Margaret," one woman told me. But this was remarkable. Yet I didn't let the attention change me. I still cooked my own meals, tended my garden, and wore the same simple clothes. I had no desire to flaunt wealth or power. My victory wasn't in the money or the shares. It was in reclaiming my dignity without lowering myself to cruelty. Vanessa, however, couldn't ignore the change. She avoided me for a while, ashamed and unsettled. I heard from Daniel that she rarely spoke about the company at home anymore. The confidence she once carried when boasting about her family's empire was gone. It had been replaced by caution, as though she finally understood that arrogance has consequences. Weeks later, she came to see me. She stood on my porch in a crisp white blouse, her hair tied back simply, without the usual layers of glamour. For the first time since I had known her, Vanessa looked unsure of herself. She hesitated before speaking. "Margaret," she began, her voice quiet, "I owe you an apology. I've treated you unfairly for years. I judged you because you didn't live like me, because you didn't flaunt what you had. But I see now that you have more strength than I ever gave you credit for." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Her words caught me off guard, not because I hadn't hoped for them, but because I never expected them. I studied her face and saw sincerity there, perhaps for the first time. I nodded and replied, "Respect isn't given because of wealth, Vanessa. It's earned through kindness, humility, and the way we treat others. I forgive you, but I hope you've learned that lesson deeply." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I have, more than you know." From then on, our relationship began to shift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't perfect. Old habits die hard, and Vanessa still struggled with pride at times. But she tried. She invited me more often, asked for my advice, and even thanked me in front of others. It was awkward at first, but gradually, walls began to fall. The most important change, though, was in the children. Lucas and Lily grew up seeing not just the wealth of their mother's side, but also the resilience and wisdom of their grandmother. They learned that respect is more important than riches, and that true power comes from patience and integrity. One afternoon, Lily tugged at my sleeve and said, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you." Those words meant more to me than any financial success ever could. As months passed, I continued to play an active role in the Whitmore Company, not to control, but to ensure it remained stable. I became a voice of reason in board meetings, one that even Richard came to rely on. "You have a sharp mind, Margaret," he once admitted. "It's a shame we underestimated you." His respect was hard-earned, but it was genuine. Looking back, I realized this entire journey had been about more than just standing up to Vanessa. It was about proving, to myself and to everyone else, that no one's worth should ever be dismissed because of appearances. I had been underestimated, ridiculed, and dismissed as ordinary, but ordinary women, when underestimated, have the power to change everything. That is the lesson I carried forward. Not to fight with arrogance, not to respond with cruelty, but to rise above with patience, strategy, and dignity. Vanessa may never forget the moment she saw my name on that document, but I will never forget the moment I chose to stay true to myself. In the end, respect isn't about who sits at the head of the table. It's about who walks away with their head held high. And that, I realized, had been me all along. If you believe respect is more valuable than wealth, subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.